Hey guys, welcome to Boxing Squared for boxing news and views from around the internet. The race to become the mandatory challenger to Deontay Wilder's WBC belt, well, it's just got a whole lot more interesting, with the WBC ordering recently defeated title challenger Luis Ortiz to fight Dillian Whyte in a final eliminator. Yes, that's right, a final eliminator. So this news, it hit me like a slap in the face. Because it's not often that someone in Ortiz's position gets thrown a title lifeline so quickly after losing to the champion. In the immediate aftermath of Ortiz's March defeat, and it really was only March, I did state that I did fear for the Cuban's future prospects because of him putting on such a good display against the Bronze Bomber. Other top contenders were likely to see him as a high-risk, low-reward scenario. I mean, who would want to fight him? The payday probably wouldn't be great. And would it really advance their cause? Because if they lose, well, they're sort of rebuilding for another year or two. And I've stated on a number of occasions since, I didn't see any way that Dillian Whyte, because this is what a lot of fans were suggesting, that Ortiz should fight Whyte, or, you know, that sort of thing. They should set it up voluntarily. But I didn't see that scenario as being viable. And I stated that I thought it would have to be ordered for it to happen. And as unlikely as that possibility was in my mind of it being ordered, well, here we are. It has been ordered. So in a way, I'm very pleased for Ortiz, but more on that later. But first I want to get to the reported details and then some general thoughts, because there is a few interesting talking points with this one. How has Ortiz jumped straight into a final eliminator? What about Dominic Breazeale, because he's ranked ahead of Luis Ortiz in the WBC rankings? And will Dillian Whyte even take the fight? Some good questions there. Buckle in. Let's go. Okay, so the WBC, it has ordered Ortiz and Whyte to fight in a final eliminator. A purse bid has been set for May 25th in Mexico City, and if the contest heads to a purse bid, the split will be 50-50. And the news, it was up on Luis Ortiz's social media platforms in a flash, and right out of the gate, Luis Ortiz's manager, Jay Jimenez, was saying Luis King Kong Ortiz versus Dillian Whyte has just been ordered by the WBC to face off for the mandatory spot to face Wilder. And judging by the picture in this Instagram post, Team Ortiz, it clearly had got the news out to local media in the Florida area quick smart. Okay, so Dillian Whyte, he reacted, but his reaction was aimed at Deontay Wilder, saying, "At Bronze Bomber." All I've got to say is, ha 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 ha, when you want some real work from a young, hungry fighter, look me up. You are a joke. Champion. Team Duck Squad. And previously, I mean, why would he say these things? So previously, Wilder, he said he would be happy to fight Dillian Whyte if one or two things happened. And one of them was a guaranteed fight with Whyte's stablemate Anthony Josh was included in a contract. Or two, if Whyte fought and beat Luis Ortiz, he'd be happy to fight Dillian Whyte in that scenario. And now we have a Dillian Whyte and Luis Ortiz fight ordered. Okay, so I know there's going to be some people, some chatter from some quarters that the WBC, that it's bowed to Deontay Wilder's demands and thrown up an extremely difficult roadblock for Whyte to get through. He's already rated the #1 boxer. A lot of people were expecting that he potentially may be made mandatory, or if there was an eliminator, it would likely be against someone like a Dominic Breazeale, who is the #2 ranked fighter in the WBC. But it's Luis Ortiz, and just remember, it's boxing. I guess anything is possible here. I mean, we don't know what the WBC's motives were. Some people will say Wilder hasn't had an influence here. But it will be very interesting to hear what the WBC has to say on the matter. Because like me, many I'm sure will be wondering, just how exactly has that happened? How has Ortiz managed to be gifted such a plum opportunity so soon? And I'll come to the rankings soon, because some will say, well, he's #3 in the rankings. But that would avoid the question, well, why wasn't he dropped further down the rankings after his loss to Deontay Wilder? Because that is normally what happens. People get, if they've been defeated in a title fight, generally they'll get dropped further down the rankings towards the tail end of the top 15 or so. But anyway, in terms of recent examples from the heavyweight division of something similar to this, someone being beaten and then coming back, I guess we could look at the Berman-Stavern situation. He lost to Wilder in January 2015, But then off the back of one journeyman fight, he was then thrust into a final eliminator against Alexander Povetkin, and that was set for late 2016. Never happened because of a failed doping test, and then Stavern was upgraded to the mandatory challenger. It's not completely like for like, but it's close. So another similar situation of a fighter jumping straight back into the title mix, and this is sort of cutting out the eliminator, is Vladimir Klitschko, who was sanctioned to fight in a unification bout with Anthony Joshua coming off a loss in a year of inactivity. The key takeout for me is that, while it is unusual, it's not unheard of, but at the end of the day, these sanctioning bodies, they do what they like to suit their own agenda, and nothing really should surprise us. I mean, they like to talk a good game of fairness, etc., but then they go and do many quizzical things. They play favourites, they operate with the credibility which is the size of an amoeba. And let's not kid ourselves, these sanctioning bodies hold boxing to ransom, hold fans to ransom, and we're just mere spectators in all of this. But I mean, that's a much broader discussion for another day. I mean, this Ortiz example is just an example. It's probably not even one of the bad examples. But it is curious indeed that he has risen to this position of prominence so quickly. I mean, some will say, but Boxing Squared, Ortiz is one of the best guys in the heavyweight division. He's rated at number 3. He's proven he deserves a shot. And I get all that, but he just had his shot. And I don't disagree that he's not one of the best. But this case, it is different to the norm. Because normally after a defeat in a title fight, that defeated titleist would be dropped down the rankings, as I mentioned before, and then they would end up grafting their way back over a period of a couple of years to earn another title shot. It's a pretty well-worn path, and often, actually, they'll get that title shot in another division. And remember, Ortiz, it's just weeks from his loss to Wilder. He can't fight for 3 months because he was knocked out. It's still that fresh, and now he's walking into a final eliminator situation. I mean, Ortiz, he may not have had the best luck in his career, but he's certainly got the right side of the coin toss in this instance. And from that standpoint, I'm very happy for Ortiz because at 38, his best days are probably behind him. I mean, even in that Deontay Wilder fight, if it had been 4 or 5 years ago, who knows, he could have got the job done. He's 38, allegedly, but, getting another big fight so quickly after a major loss, it's great career-wise for him, and no doubt will ensure another decent payday. And he does deserve that. He hasn't had many big ones. I mean, whoever the opponent is, because it's not guaranteed that Whyte will take the fight. And I'll come to that in a second. But the other elephant in the room, where does this leave Dominic Breazeale, the number 2 in the WBC rankings? He's one spot above Luis Ortiz. There's a couple of possible scenarios. Either he said no to being in an eliminator, which then brings Ortiz into play, or the WBC did not present the opportunity. I mean, either way, it raises questions. There's no doubt going to be some who will read from it that Breazeale has another fight lined up, and that fight might be with Deontay Wilder. It's widely believed that Wilder's plan B, should negotiations to fight Anthony Joshua fail, that he will fight Dominic Breazeale. And given that the way the negotiations are tracking with the Joshua camp, I'm leaning to it at this point to that fight not happening yet. So Breazeale, he could well be a live and viable option for Wilder. Remember, both are Al Haymon fighters. It's an easy fight to make. Keeps the money in-house. There's a bit of bad blood between the pair as well, and that always adds to a build-up. But going back to a key plank in all this, will Dillian Whyte fight Luis Ortiz? Maybe. He's got a choice to make about what he's doing because he's already been ordered to fight Kubrat Pulev in an IBF eliminator. So if I had to guess what will happen, then I would say that Whyte will go fight the IBF route, simply because his ultimate goal has always been a rematch with Anthony Joshua. He's never made that a secret. He wants another shot at Joshua. Plus, it'll be a massive payday too. So the Pulev fight, it would lead to that opportunity eventually, if he can get past the Bulgarian. We know he does desperately want to fight Wilder as well. He's tried to sign a fight with him. He's made multi-million-dollar offers to Deontay Wilder for a voluntary defense. But at this point, Wilder has indicated he's not really that interested in a Dillian Whyte fight. He's only prepared to make it under those couple of situations, the scenarios that are outlined earlier. And he has stated that if he doesn't get his way with the Anthony Joshua stuff, he could definitely make Whyte wait even if he was made the mandatory. So it's very possible that if you consider the time element of all this, if Dillian Whyte got past Kubrat Pulev in the IBF route, it would potentially provide a quicker path to a title shot for Whyte. And that's what he wants. He wants title shot. And given that Joshua is in the same stable as Whyte, you could see if the IBF made Whyte the mandatory, that fight would be pretty easy to make. Eddie Hearn would be loving that. All the money in-house. Also throw in here, don't forget this, Dillian Whyte, he's never really called out Luis Ortiz in the same way as he has other fighters. Even just this week, Whyte proceeded to list the fighters he wanted to target in the next 12 months, if possible. Ortiz was not on the list, and he was a glaring omission, because those guys on the list were pretty much the top 7 guys, and Ortiz wasn't on the list, and he deserved, and he is part of that sort of the top 6 to 8 guys. He's somewhere in that sort of 3 to 7 range. So you've got to ask yourself, does Dillian Whyte actually want that work? Does he want to fight Luis Ortiz? Jerry's out on that. He hasn't really called him out, hasn't made a lot of noise about him. So, you know, even when someone like Deontay Wilder has said, hey, Luis Ortiz, da-da-da-da-da, there's really been nothing back from the Whyte side. It's interesting. I mean, I know some people say, oh, Dillian Whyte, he's game, he will fight anyone. But actually, in terms of Luis Ortiz, he's never really made a lot of noise. So Whyte and his promoter, they've got some decisions to make. But if we're honest about it, Dillian Whyte's in a pretty good position. Neither's really a bad choice, because they're both good fights, and they're both routes to a title shot. And certainly if Whyte were to face Luis Ortiz, it is a very tough fight, and I think I would favour Ortiz, but not by much. I mean, it would be a decent fight. And what it would do as well is put Wilder and Ortiz's March performance into perspective, win or lose. And here's another thing to consider with all this. Should Dillian Whyte choose to go the IBF way, it then opens up another spot for the next guy in the WBC rankings. So if you look at Alexander Povetkin at number 4, he's likely to say no because he's the WBA mandatory. So with that in mind, you'd have to go to number 5. Who's at number 5? Joseph Parker. And because Parker, he's in a similar situation to Ortiz in terms of it might be tough for him to get top fights unless they're ordered, because he is a bit dangerous in terms of other contenders out there. Walking into a final eliminator after coming off a loss to Anthony Joshua, well, if that happened, it would be a dream scenario for Joseph Parker. Fact. Certainly interesting times in the WBC, and Dillian Whyte, he's got some decisions to make. What do you make of it all? Drop a comment loud and often, hit like, hit subscribe, follow me on Twitter, boxing_squared. I'm out.